greet you with the Islamic greeting. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you. My name is Rayhan Basir, and I'm the chair of the Queen's University Muslim Student Association. I would like to extend a warm welcome to each and every single one of you for coming out to tonight's event. I know that this week has been a busy one for many of you. You have midterms, but the fact that you guys all came out here, we really, really appreciate it. In addition to that, amongst us we have the AMS executive team here, so I'd just like to extend a warm welcome to all of you guys from the Muslim community here on campus. So we hope you guys enjoy tonight's event. So today marks the second day of Islamic Awareness Week. So it's a week that gives us Muslims a chance to clarify misconceptions here on campus and teach individuals about the Islamic belief so that they're further familiar with it. So today we have the first of our 2 lectures this week. In terms of the format, we will have the speaker who will give a lecture till 7:40. At 7:40 we will have a question-answer period. Following that, there will be refreshments outside in the hallway, so you can get that as well. So just a brief introduction for many of you guys that don't know who the speaker is. The speaker that we have today is not a mystery for many of us. He is an imam, a journalist, a teacher, and a marketer. He's a homegrown Canadian born in Montreal. He spent 4 years memorizing the entire Quran in Arabic, followed by a 6-year classical study of Islam. Between 2000 and 2006, he founded and ran eathalal.com, the web's first interactive site offering information on what foods were halal. So halal is our foods that are permissible for Muslims. As a young news junkie who wasn't allowed to watch television, he spent his childhood reading newspapers and listening to The World at 6 and As It Happens on CBC Radio. During the summer of 2005, he worked as a general assignment reporter at the Toronto Star, Canada's largest daily newspaper. In 2008, he graduated with distinction after having completed his BA with a specialization in journalism. In terms of teaching, during the summer of 2004, he taught Quran and basic Islamic studies at a mosque in Montreal. As Imam at the Islamic Society here in Kingston, he taught Quranic studies and Tajweed from 2010 until 2014. He also served as principal of the Islamic Society of Kingston evening and weekend school, managing over 100 students and staff of 13 teachers. It is needless to say that this individual has had a prominent effect not just on the Kingston Society, but for Canadians in general. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, and without further ado, it is my great pleasure and honor to invite Imam Sikander Hashmi to come and speak.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. I begin with the Islamic greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. Thank you so much for having me this evening. It's my pleasure to be here with you. It's great to see familiar faces, and you're reminding me of my good times here in Kingston. As you heard in the intro, I'm not an editor. I work as a reporter. And reporters definitely do make a lot of spelling mistakes. So there's one on the cover slide, unfortunately. But I see that's something we would leave for the copy editors, right? So they would have a hard time as we would just spit out our copy and send it over to the copy desk, and then they were the ones going through the thesaurus and the dictionary and everything else, right? Nonetheless, it's a great blessing. And we thank God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for giving us the opportunity to be here in a place of peace, in a place of comfort. As it's cold and snowing outside, and it's getting quite windy as well. And, we're here comfortably in warmth. And of course, in many parts of the world, there are many people who are unable to gather together as we have this evening in peace because of violence and war and so many other challenges that they face. So it's a great blessing of God that we have this opportunity to be here together. And we also must extend our thanks to those who make it possible, right? So in terms of the society that we live in, the people who have given us the opportunity to gather together and to live in this peace, and who have maintained it as such. Now, it's no secret that there is much attention being given to Muslims and to Islam nowadays. And before, it used to be just the media that would be very interested in what Muslims are doing, especially if it was negative. But now it's also politicians too, and also the public as well. And there's a general interest in a lot of things that Muslims are doing, sometimes unfortunate things and sometimes positive things as well. As with any issue, I think it's very important to understand the nature of the attention, to understand properly, with a bit of depth, beyond the headlines, and to gain a proper understanding so that we can formulate informed opinions. So it's important to dig deeper, to improve that understanding, because what we see at the outset or at the forefront is not always reflective of the reality. And I think for Muslims as well, it is very important to understand the nature of the attention, to understand, why is this attention or the spotlight being put on the community, on the faith, and explore ways to deal with it as well. And I really believe that, if everyone has a willingness to learn, if everyone has a willingness to understand, even if we don't agree with each other, right? If we just start talking and start listening to each other, I think we can really learn, we can really figure out where others are coming from. And that can really help in building mutual respect and breaking stereotypes and assumptions that we all end up making in one way or the other. So if you look at a sample of recent headlines, and these are quite recent, right? This is what we've been noticing at the newsstand or online, and it's just a brief sample of the types of headlines or the types of things that are being mentioned. And sometimes I'm amazed that I will be listening to a national newscast, and like the first, leading top 3 stories, one after the other, consecutively, will have, something to do with Muslims, something to do with Islam. And as you can see, the negative ones are usually the ones that get the most attention because, as you would know, the media is about selling stories, right? So it's about viewership, readership, advertising. And usually the bad stuff just sells better, right? A good news story on the front page is not going to sell papers, unfortunately, most of the time, right? It's the negative stuff that has to be up at the front, because that's what's going to get people afraid, that's what's going to get people talking, that's what's going to get them paying attention. So unfortunately, this is what we see. That's not to say that it's not factual. Overall, a lot of times it will be factual. So a lot of these headlines, there might be a bit of hyperbole, but otherwise, they may be factually correct. But overall, when we look at what's happening and we look at the coverage and the way it's done, what happens is that it makes people afraid. And once people are afraid, it becomes easy to become suspicious. Suspicion then breeds mistrust, and mistrust then breeds hate. Okay, so that's how it's working. So we've got fear, and then we've got suspicion. Because once you're afraid and you look at this, you say, "Oh my goodness, the Muslims are coming!" Right? Oh my God, right? The Muslims are coming, or they want to take over the world, or they want to take over the country, right? And you start thinking, well, if this could happen, in one place, then it could happen somewhere else. And if one Muslim could do it, then another Muslim could do it as well, right? And it's the emotions that take over, it's irrational thought that takes over, and then makes people afraid. That's not to say that there's anything wrong being afraid. I mean, we're all human beings. We're all afraid of one thing or the other. We're not always thinking rationally. God has given us emotions. So clearly we are going to get emotional. We are going to get afraid. But what's key is how do we actually channel that and how do we deal with that? And that's not to say that the fear is just amongst the non-Muslim population, right? The fear is shared, right? So you'll have fear in the broader community with regards to Muslims and Islam, but then you'll also have fear within the Muslim community as well about the response coming from the majority and from the broader community. So tonight what I want to do is, because the headlines tell only part of the story, or a very small part of the story, what I would like to do is share with you the story of Islam in Canada, and then deal with some of these topics as well. The first record of Islam arriving in this land was, not in the 70s, not the 60s, but you go back over 100 years before that, okay? And we're talking about the mid-1800s, okay? Around 1815, there was immigration from Scotland, where there were people who were fleeing the economic and the agricultural crises there, and people were coming to what was to become Canada. It was not Canada at the time; it was Upper Canada, and the first Muslim settlers arrived as part of that wave. So in 1840, and this is what we have on record, right? So there might have been others who came before that as well, but at least on record, the first Muslims to arrive and to settle in what was to become Canada were a couple by the name of Henry and Eliza Hunt. And they arrived in the 1840s. Now, Mr. Hunt was from England, Mrs. Hunt from Scotland, and they actually settled in Glengarry Township. And Glengarry Township is actually quite familiar to me because where I studied my religion at North America's first Islamic seminary is actually on the shores of the St. Lawrence in Charlottenburg, which you actually see, the township of Charlottenburg, which was part of what was Glengarry County at that time. So they actually settled there, and what we learned though is that they maintained their Islamic faith for some time, for about 3 decades. But by 1871, neither the couple nor their children identified themselves with Islam. So this is the first record we have of Islam actually showing up in Canada. It might have happened before as well, but on record, this is what we know. But then it wasn't sustainable. It didn't sustain itself. And that was the end of that. Now, during that time, there was the first recorded Muslim birth in Canada. And again, this was not a Abdullah or a Fatima or Zainab who was born. This was James Love Jr. Okay, James Love Jr. Remember that? I love that name, right? It's so lovely. James Love Jr. was the first Muslim child on record to be born in Canada. And this was 13 years before Confederation. Okay, so 1854, 13 years before 1867. And we don't know what happened to James Love Jr. At least I don't know. I haven't come across anything. I haven't read anything. And I'm not sure if it's even possible to trace Islam to that point, meaning to see what became of Islam from James Love Jr. But what we do know is that Muslims continue to come to this land. And the first settlers out west in the prairies came from Syria and from Lebanon. And they started, there was lots of land there, so they started taking advantage of that. and they settled down there. And the numbers slowly started to increase. And it was around 1930, when there were about 645 Muslims in Canada, 645 Muslims in Canada at that time, when they decided that they actually needed a place to congregate. They wanted to build a mosque so they can get together for their prayers, for their social events, and to build a sense of community. So this was the Al Rashid Mosque, which was built in Edmonton. So here we find now the first record of Islam actually being practiced, and it's still there and it's established now. Okay, so this was in 1938 is actually when the mosque opened. It has a really nice story as well. It was actually a group of Muslim women who decided that they were going to take the first step to make this thing happen, to make this mosque happen. So they went to the mayor of Edmonton by the name of John Fry and told Mr. Fry that they wanted to build a mosque. And Mr. Fry was a kind gentleman. He said, well, the city can offer you land provided that you're able to construct the building yourself, so pay for the building of the mosque, which was a huge, enormous sum of $6,000 at that time, okay? Which was really a lot because, we were talking about the Great Depression, the 1930s, so it was, it was very difficult. And they got together, these women, may God bless them, and, went fundraising from really anyone, so went up and down Jasper's Avenue in Edmonton and just went up to all the different shopkeepers, whether they were Muslim or Christian or Jewish, and asked for them to contribute, and they did. And this mosque was opened up in 1938, and this was, it's actually still there, not the same location, but they had to move it a couple of times, and now it's actually at Fort Edmonton Park, which is sort of like Upper Canada Village. At first I thought it was just a normal park when I went. I had no idea why they were charging me $14 to get inside a park. I was like, man, these little burns are a bunch of ripoffs. And then I actually realized that it was sort of like Upper Canada Village, and they had these different avenues, these different streets from different eras, and there was a lot more to it than just a regular park. And it's still preserved at that location. Now, in terms of other mosques, so this was the first one. Then the second one came up in 1958. And you'd think it would be in Toronto or Montreal or Calgary. It was actually in Lac La Biche, Alberta. Okay, 1958, the second mosque in Canada. And then in the 60s, you had a few others, some of the larger ones now. So for example, in Montreal and Toronto and in Ottawa as well. Unfortunately, nowadays, we find a situation that mosques are somewhat feared in some places. Okay, so we've heard the stories, the news stories, coming out of Quebec with regards to, a Islamic center or a mosque that people were trying to build or open in Shawinigan, and there was a lot of pressure on city council, and they voted against it. Right. So now that's not to say that sometimes there are valid concerns. There are issues in some places where mosques have opened up in residential areas, for example, with regards to parking, especially during Friday services, and so on and so forth. So there are some legitimate concerns, but I think we have to admit that bigotry does play a role too sometimes as well. So these were very small communities at that time. So this is a picture of a group photo. This is a group photo of a Muslim community in Montreal in 1962 after Eid prayers. So Eid is one of there's two major holidays in Islam. So Eid after the month of fasting, after the month of Ramadan, and the Eid of sacrifice, which coincides with the Hajj pilgrimage and commemorates the willingness of the Prophet Abraham to sacrifice his son, peace be upon them both. So this is one of those gatherings after Ramadan in 1962, a very small community, as you can see, where everyone could pretty much fit into one photograph. Won't really happen nowadays when you have like 100,000 people. But they were very small. And the population grew. So here's a graph you can see. There's 13 Muslims in 1871. Okay, 13 Muslims in 1871. This is the census, right? Goes up to 33,000 in 1971, 98,000 in 1981, and then it climbs, continues to climb, and estimates are that it's around 1 million now, or just over 1 million. Now, when we talk about growth, it's also important to note that Islam is now the second, largest religious group. Muslims make up the second largest religious group in Canada. Don't let that scare you, please. It is a very small percentage. It's about 2 to 3%, and it's also very, very diverse. And I think it's very important to remember that, because whenever we see a headline or we see a news story, unfortunately, we see a Muslim in the news, I get the feeling that a lot of times it's taken as being representative of all Muslims. The fact of the matter is that Islam in general, the Muslims in general, are very, very diverse. And we look at the map here of, quote unquote, the Muslim world, or Muslim majority countries, or countries with sizable Muslim populations. You'll see that Muslims come from many, many different parts of the world. And this diversity is reflected here in Canada as well. Even if you look around, the community here, if you look over any major center and look at the Muslim community, it's very diverse. And you'll find Muslims from 50, 60 odd different countries speaking different languages. So ethnically and culturally, very, very diverse. And the basics when it comes to faith, of course, are the same. So belief in one God, who does not have any partners, belief in all the prophets of God, including Abraham, beginning from Adam and Noah and Abraham and Moses and Joseph and all the prophets of the Judeo-Christian tradition, the exception of Jesus, obviously not being considered a son of God, but revered as a prophet, and then that entire chain ending with the final messenger of God, Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon them all. So these are the basics, right, which are agreed upon by all Muslims, regardless of their ethnic background, regardless of even their religious diversity, which I'll talk about. Those things will all be the same. The belief in all the previous scriptures that God had sent to the various prophets, including the Psalms and the Gospels and so on, and the Torah. So all of that, being scriptures from God that a Muslim must believe in order to be a Muslim. That God had actually sent these scriptures to his righteous prophets at that time. And the Quran then is seen as the final testament, right? So they're all coming from the same source. And I sort of give the example of Microsoft or Apple nowadays, right? So you got different iOS updates. You have Windows 3.1, you have Windows 95, you have Windows 98, Windows XP, you had Windows, whatever, you lose track, right? And then, they're all coming from the same source, but it's just updating each version for the times and the needs at that particular moment of time. So Muslims, regardless of their ethnic background, will believe in those basics, but their culture does play, or cultural influences, I should say, do play an important role in how Muslims actually, look at things, how they even sometimes practice some of the finer parts of their faith and their traditions as well. When we look at the religious diversity, now this is a graph that I found, I didn't make it, and I think for the most part it is relatively accurate. So, a lot of people here, meaning in Canada, I think often wonder, they ask, what's up with these Sunnis and Shias? What's going on, or why are they why do we always hear something in the news about them? So basically, we have two major, you could say, branches within the Muslim world. The majority being Sunnis, Shias being a minority here. It says 20%, some say about 15%. And the difference stems back to a political difference that occurred very soon after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as to who should be his successor, who should be leading afterwards. And that essentially, because it started off so early on, it basically led them to branch off into different directions. Although, again, the very, very core basics are pretty much, are relatively the same. If you look at the Sunni side, you do have different schools of Islamic jurisprudence some of the four of the major ones. And with the diversity that we have in Canada within the Muslim community, you'll find people who ascribe to any of these different schools. It doesn't really make a huge difference in terms of their practice. There are some relatively minor differences, and for the most part, people tend to get along. They'll probably have perhaps their own preferences. They might have their own mosque, but it's not like it's not like you have to have formal membership to go into a mosque. Anyone could really go into any mosque and pray. Even if it's a Sunni mosque, you might have someone who's Shia who comes in and prays, and vice versa. So it's not something that it is something that divides people, but it's not something that divides them to an extent where they actually have very strong animosity against each other. Now you do notice one term here. You have a term here that is often used by people, especially nowadays, in the media, and has become a common term. It's almost like a slur, right? So if you want to really, if you really want to put a Muslim down, and you really want to, make them look bad, you call them a Wahhabist, right? You call them a Salafist, right? And then everyone's like, oh no, don't call me that, because it has all these negative connotations around it. And I think, it's the reason, and I'm being perfectly honest and frank here. The reason why that often comes up is because if you notice here, there's a mention of Al-Qaeda and ISIS branching out from this side, okay, from this group. So this is one of the reasons why these terms actually come up quite a bit. And if you look at the greater picture of the Muslim community, you actually notice that it's a very small minority, or at least one branch coming from one side. That being said, I think, as with any group, I think we really have to be careful. And this is not like a terrorist group, or this is not. I'm talking about these. When we talk about Wahhabis and Salafis, we're not talking about a particular monolithic group that has some sort of hierarchy or that has some sort of agenda or anything like that. Okay, so this is actually, these are very broad terms, and people may actually define them differently as well. So I think the right approach is to take a balanced approach and to say that, we do have, one of the great things that we enjoy in Canada is the fact that we actually have freedom of belief. Okay? And that's one of the things that actually makes this country so beautiful, that you can actually be living here and you can believe in whatever you want, okay? And as long as you're respecting the rights of others, you're not hurting anyone, you're respecting the law, okay? So we have freedom of belief, and that is something that needs to be respected. Okay, so one thing that we should all be agreeing upon, and I'm now a member of the Council of Imams of Ottawa Gatineau, and there is diversity in Ottawa as well. You have Muslims from different backgrounds, and imams from these different schools of thought. And that's one thing that we all agree upon, that you absolutely have to be law-abiding, and you absolutely have to ensure that you are going to respect the rights of your fellow citizens, and that you're not going to harm anyone. Okay. Once that is taken care of, so you're going to be law-abiding, just like anyone else in Canada. You are going to be respecting the rights of your fellow citizens. You're going to be committing yourself to making sure that the country remains safe. After that, there's freedom of belief and there's freedom of opinion. Okay, so frankly, I don't really care which school of thought someone subscribes to or what they follow, even if they're Muslim or not, whatever. As long as they're respecting the basics of what it means to live here, and that means that you're free to believe and express and do whatever you like, provided you're not hurting anyone else, providing you're following laws, providing you're making sure that this country remains safe. Now people talk about ideology, right? And they say that, well, this is the ideology that needs to be countered, this is where all of this is coming from, and so on and so forth. And my answer to that is, any challenging of ideology cannot be done through laws. Okay, there's only so much you can do through laws to control what people think, to control what people see, and what people read and what people talk about. Okay? So laws are really not going to do the job there. Okay? If you're talking about ideology, ideology needs to come or needs to be challenged from within. Okay? So any attempt to try to impose that, any attempt to try to force it to happen is most likely going to fail. Okay? It has to come from within, from people who are part of the community and who are part of the faith. So this, again, goes back to highlight the fact that no one is actually truly representative of Muslims. Okay? So even if I go and speak in the media, now of course for the broader community, for the viewers, it might seem like, okay, here is someone who's representing the community, but the fact of the matter is that I am basically representing whoever I'm speaking for. So it may be my organization, it may be the Council of Imams, but I'm not representing all Muslims. And we have to remember that whether it's someone who's saying something, doing something, or meaning saying something, doing something positive, or perhaps doing something negative, it should not be taken as representing all Muslims. Now, because of this, we also find diversity within mosques as well. Okay, and one of the things, unfortunately, that has sort of crept in, I think, nowadays is, I wonder what happens inside a mosque. Like, what are these Muslims up to? Like it's some kind of bunker or something. Okay, a mosque is really a place of worship. Okay, pretty much like any other church. Okay, people go there. Yeah, they probably go in there a lot more often because there's 5 prayers a day, and no, they're not very long. Okay, I try to make them short. Actually, that's what the Prophet advised. He actually said, don't make the prayers, congregational prayers especially, long, because there may be someone who's ill, there may be someone who's elderly, there may be a mother with a young child, who can't stick along for a long time. So be considerate and keep them short. So the prayers, there's 5 prayers a day. Usually take about 5 to 10 minutes, I guess, right, to perform them. They are done in the direction of Mecca, where the grand mosque is, and the cube. It's actually not a cube; it's a black rectangle. The Kaaba building exists, which was the first house of worship created for the one God on earth, and that's the direction that we face in. So people will come, just like they will come to a church or a synagogue, they'll come to a mosque to pray. They'll come for services on Fridays, right? So that's when the services take place, the weekly services. Usually either during the lunch hour, because the prayers do have timings, have windows in which they have to be offered. So the prayers usually take place around 1 p.m. or so. And then, just regular functions of a place of worship, education, Sunday school, Saturday school, evening classes for adults, for children, social functions, right? So potlucks and different gatherings, family parties and community gatherings, marriages, funerals in some mosques as well, where the body of the deceased has to be ritually washed before burial. And then mosques will have other functions as well, depending on the mosque. They'll have outreach committees sometimes, like here we have in Kingston, the Islamic Society of Kingston. So you'll have groups of people who are reaching out for interfaith connections or reaching out to other to groups who are in need and so on and so forth. Open houses are something which are very common, right? So the next time you hear someone talking about I wonder what's happening at that mosque, well look for the open house. I know there's one here annually in Kingston, and in other cities as well. You'll have many mosques who will take part, who will have various open houses. And mosques are there for giving assistance as well. We'll have people come up to us for financial assistance, for assistance with their family situation, with their marriages, and other issues that they're facing. I just had a call just on my way here. Someone who was who was supposed to have a child, didn't work out, and she was in hospital and wanted advice and wanted to know how to deal with it. So we'll really be mosques and imams will be really dealing with all types of issues. In terms of programming, this is just a sample of some of the event posters I was able to pull potlucks, lectures, health-related, family-related, and some of the issues have to do with taking Islamic teachings and figuring out how to apply them in a contemporary context. What we have to remember is that, Islam, the primary sources of Islam are the Quran, which is revealed over a period of 23 years, from God through the angel Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So it did not come together as one book. It came in bits and pieces. So sometimes there are verses, sometimes there's an entire chapter, sometimes phrases and so on, and they're revealed, memorized, recorded, and then eventually put together into a form of a book. So all the verses were basically revealed at different times with regards to a particular context. The sayings and the traditions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, which is referred to as the Sunnah or the Hadith, are also another primary source of guidance in Islam. And they too were stated in particular contexts at particular times. So it's really important to understand and to remember that there's no concept of cherry-picking rulings or cherry-picking laws and jurisprudence just by opening a book and reading something, right? But rather it's to be taken from the entire compendium of teachings. And one of the things I think that we really need to do, and clearly it is happening, is to figure out how those teachings, which clearly came, not in our times, but 1400 odd years ago, how exactly are they to be manifested? How are they to be applied in today's context, in the world that we live in today? Because the world that we live in and the challenge that we face today are not quite exactly the same as they were in those days. There may be similarities, of course, but things have changed considerably. That's not to say that we can't derive inspiration or other forms of personal guidance from those primary sources. But when it comes to rulings, when it comes to actual rulings of jurisprudence, it needs to be done from the compendium of teachings. So some of the challenges that we face today, I think that Muslims a lot of times face, especially when they're becoming devout or they're trying to be practicing, is how to take those teachings and apply them today. So for example, there's this poster of an event, this is from Calgary, of gender interaction in Islam, contemporary issues and solutions. One event that I was actually part of was called the J Word, and this happened about a month or so ago, February 6th, in Ottawa. And the challenge with regards to the J Word is, by the way, the J Word refers to jihad. Okay, and the reason why we call it the J Word is because it's become such a loaded term that Muslims are so reluctant to touch that many times we don't even talk about it, because we're afraid that if someone hears us mention the word, who knows who's going to say what or take it in which way, so we just avoid the topic altogether, which actually has not helped. Okay, reason is that jihad, by the way, in Arabic means struggle. Okay, so jihad is clearly mentioned in Islamic texts, in the primary sources, in the Quran and the Sunnah, and referred to in different is actually in different contexts with different meanings. So, for example, the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, has said that the greatest jihad is the internal struggle that we face, that each of us faces within ourselves, the struggle between right and wrong, right? That we all go through, our conscience and our morality and so on. Right? So the internal struggle that we face in trying to do the right thing. So that is one form. We also have been told that the most virtuous form of jihad is actually to say a word of truth or justice in front of a tyrant ruler. To say a word of truth or justice in front of a tyrant ruler. Okay, so we see that there's different meanings in different contexts, and of course there is also a meaning of actual warfare. Okay, so this clearly exists. So just if we don't talk about it, okay, and people, especially young people, know that it exists because they can read the primary sources, everything's available online and there's books and everything, where are they going to get the guidance from as to how this applies in their life, in their world today? Okay, and what ends up happening is there's curiosity, you want to know something, no one wants to tell you, where do you turn? Where do you turn? Internet. Google, right? That's where you go. Or Yahoo if you're still like, in the previous century. No, just kidding. Okay, so, that's where people are turning for guidance on these types of issues, and that makes them susceptible then to fall into rhetoric, fall into propaganda that is coming from groups that clearly don't have their best interests in mind. So these teachings they exist in other traditional sources as well. They need to be contextualized. They need to be talked about because if we don't talk about them, that actually creates a larger problem. And I think for a number of years we've been trying to avoid these topics because people are just afraid to touch them or just didn't know how to deal with them. But I think the time has now come that we're actually starting to deal with, what does it actually mean? How is it supposed to happen? When is it supposed to happen? What are the responsibilities regarding this, and so on and so forth. One thing that we have been very clear about, though, is that jihad is not terrorism. That jihad is not terrorism. So what we see, terrorist acts happening against innocent people, destruction of property, so on and so forth, that is not jihad. And jihad actually comes with, and I'm talking about actual warfare, comes with very strict rules of engagement. The question comes up about radicalization, right? And we hear that a lot in the media, okay? And the one question that I think everyone wants to know about is, why is this happening? Why is it happening? Get this constantly in the media as well. Why is it happening? What's causing it? What's causing it? Every time something happens, some arrest or something comes up in the news, what's the problem? Why do we have a problem or not? And of course, the answer is yeah, we do have a problem, right? I think when we deal with the first step to resolving the problem is to realize, is to admit that it actually exists, right? So yes, do we have a problem? Yes, we do have a problem. However, it needs to be put into context again. Okay, and the fact of the matter is that we look at the Muslim population in Canada, right? That we know is about 1 million people or so. The actual instances are quite low. Okay, and the vast majority of the Muslim population is not buying into this stuff. Okay, they're actually rejecting it, and actually they're the ones who are speaking up against it. It's not happening in mosques, right? We hear this over and over again nowadays. What's actually being preached in mosques, what's being done in mosques. For the vast majority, I can assure you, the vast majority of mosques are not preaching this. They have no interest in doing so because they know they can get themselves into trouble, and they don't believe in it. Simply, right? And that's simply the truth. If it is happening, in some cases it is. It's happening primarily underground. And what I mean by that is it's not open in the community. It may be individuals who are, have such thoughts and feelings, and then they're sharing them with one another, or they're doing it online. And we've heard about some cases of that, and of course that is concerning. As regards to the roots, right? Why is it happening? I think one of the problems is that when we try to deal with it, right, or when we try to pinpoint a cause, we just take a singular approach. And when I say we, I just mean generally anyone who tries to pinpoint will either say, oh, it's because of Islam, right? Some people will say it's because of Islam. Some people will say, oh, it's only because of foreign policy, or it's only because of this, or it's only because of that, or it's just mental health issues thinking. And I believe that actually the reasons, the path to radicalization is actually unique for each individual, okay, or it's different for each individual. So there are a number of factors, and they may all factor into a person's decision to take that route, or maybe some of them do, or only one of them do for that particular individual. So it really, really varies. What are some of the factors? I think we have to, as a Muslim, I must admit that Islamic teachings, or the misunderstanding of Islamic teachings, does play a role sometimes, or many times. Okay, so clearly in Islam we have teachings talking about oppression. Okay, that if you see oppression happening, you need to do something about it. Okay, if you see something wrong happening, you should try to correct it. And especially with regards to, I mean, this is for all people. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was even concerned about birds. Right? There was a mother bird who was concerned, who was worried, flying around, and he found out that it was because its babies, its chicks had been taken away. And that's why the mother bird was in emotional distress, and it was fluttering around, in a panic, looking for its children. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, instructed his companions who had actually taken the chicks to let them go, to release them, so that this bird would not be emotionally distressed. So we should be concerned as Muslims about all living beings, about all human beings. But there's a special emphasis when it comes to your own family of faith. And these are your brothers and sisters. So for Muslims, it doesn't matter if there's someone from your faith who is who's being hurt, whether it's emotionally or psychologically or physically, who's next door to you, who's attending the same mosque, or is halfway around the world in another country. Okay? When there is going to be suffering of human beings, but in particular of other Muslims, this will be felt by other Muslims regardless of where they are. And this is part of the faith. Okay? And this is something that's not going to change, and we're not going to change that. Okay? But what we should be doing is making sure that the response to that is done appropriately. Okay? And this is where a lot of these people who are taking this path actually end up tripping up. Okay? So when they see what is happening, or what has happened, especially in the past decade or so, in the various countries, and especially with regards to the role of Western powers, right? When we see what has happened in Iraq, right? When we see the countless hundreds of thousands, not millions, right? Over 1 million deaths of mostly innocent people. Okay, the effects even before 9/11, the effects of the embargo in Iraq, right? And we see that what has happened with regards to Palestine, and especially what the impunity that one side is able to move forward with and unleash its force on the other side of mostly helpless, defenseless, innocent people, and it comes with the sanction of our government. These are things which really bother the conscience of not just Muslims, but many other people as well who are not Muslim. People nowadays, a lot of the young people who are being drawn in, it has to do with Syria, and they say, well, look at the hypocrisy of the West, where you have years of war going on in Syria now, and you have so many people who are dead, you have so many people who are refugees, and there's absolutely no assistance whatsoever. The lack of assistance actually led to the rise of ISIS, right? And everything that they're doing now. So if this was dealt with a long time ago, perhaps we would not be in this situation. So it's to say that and they also look at democracy, and how it has been made available. But then when the results were not favorable, and in their minds they were not favorable to the West, then democracy was then taken away, and there were dictators who were implanted and supported, and still are in some places. So we look at when especially younger people will look at all these things, this can definitely give a sense of helplessness or give a sense of concern inside them. And some of them are actually quite naive and are actually trying to help and trying to do something positive and something good, and they end up taking this route, unfortunately. Of course, mental health issues also play a role at times, and we saw that with the Ottawa shooter. And some people just have an attraction towards violence. I mean, we had the Valentine's Day plot out in Halifax, and they were described as murderous misfits, right? That was the description. People who were just inclined towards violence and inclined towards committing murder, unfortunately. So you can also have people like that who are Muslims, and this is an avenue for them that they choose to carry out their attraction towards violence, unfortunately. So these are just some of the factors, and it could be one of them, it could be all of them, it could be a combination, but it's different for nearly every person who gets drawn. As a community, we have been educating regarding these matters, individually for a long time, but collectively since the London bombings in 2005. And this is something that as community leaders have been talking about over and over and over again, and over the Muslim crowd, you've If you've heard me, you've heard others talk about this over and over again as to why these things, such actions are inappropriate, why it is definitely legitimate to have grievances, but then how should those be channeled and that they should be done in the right way. As far as groups are concerned, ISIS has, and it's actually quite remarkable because Muslims for the most part, Muslim leaders really have a hard time agreeing on a lot of things. Okay, so you'll have like differences of opinion on like practically anything. Okay, and people will always debate and argue and so on. And sometimes it's good artists, sometimes it gets to go a little bit far. But when it comes to ISIS, it's remarkable to see the almost pretty much unanimous condemnation of the group. Now the reasons may be different, but I find it to be quite remarkable that so many different scholars, so many different religious leaders from so many different groups can all come together and agree that this group is not representative of Islamic teachings, is not a group that should be followed, and is not a group that is legitimate. Of course, parents, community leaders, everyone is concerned. The way we deal with this problem, it has to be a joint effort. So it's a joint effort. Everyone needs to do their part. So community leaders and imams need to do their part. The mosques need to do their part. The government needs to do its part. The law enforcement agencies need to do their part. The social service agencies need to do their part. This has to be a collaborative effort where everyone gets together and deals with these issues. Now, another hot issue has been the clothing of women in particular. Well, women mostly. Men, have had issues in the past with beards, as a number of Muslim men will have beards, and it's common. That was in the past, so that seems to have fallen off the radar. But in particular, we see issues with regard to niqabs, which is the face covering, and that was what everyone was focused on. And then out of the blue, we have this issue with regards to hijabs as well. So hijab is the head covering. Most of the time the hijab issues are coming from Quebec. So officially it seems, and I'm born in Montreal, so it's okay, I can say that. But for the most part, in the rest of Canada, officially there doesn't seem to be a problem with regards to hijabs. But Quebec still, seems to have an issue from time to time, whether it's soccer or now it's hijab in the courtroom. Although I do sense that those sentiments are also found in other parts of Canada. So while officially it's at an official sort of level, it's Quebec that deals with these issues. But within the population, these sentiments are shared in other parts of Canada as well. Here on the bottom, we actually have a picture of Lieutenant Commander Wafa Dabagh, who was actually the first member of the military to wear a hijab. And I'm talking about the Canadian military. She was in the Navy. And sadly, she passed away a couple of years back, or 3 years ago, I think, in Ottawa. She succumbed to cancer. May Allah bless her soul. So there is diversity with regards to the hijab and the niqab within the Muslim community. So some Muslim women will cover their face, a very small minority will, at least in Canada. Many others will cover their hair, others may not cover at all. So that diversity we find. Now niqab is a lot less popular, and by that I mean the face covering, a lot less popular within the Muslim communities, but also in society in general. Now the great thing about Canada, I talked about one great thing before, but the other great thing about Canada is the fact that our laws and rulings here are generally based on principle and rationality, okay, and not just on emotions and public opinion. Okay, and that's one of the things I think that really makes us strong, makes Canada strong, is that it's not a popularity contest. There's actually laws that exist based on principle, not just because people feel like something is right or something is not. It's actually based on principle, and that's what the courts normally rule with. We have the recent court ruling with regards to the citizenship ceremony issue, where the government came up with a policy that faces need to be uncovered during the citizenship ceremony. There was a woman who was a permanent resident of Canada, eligible to take the oath of citizenship, who challenged that to say that, well, she felt that it was very important for her to have her face covered in front of people who were not in front of males who were not her relatives, and went to court, and the court ruled in her favor. Now, a lot of times people wonder why do women actually cover, right? And in particular, when it comes to the face covering, why do they cover their faces? And there's different reasons. right? So the Canadian Council of Muslim Women actually did a survey of 81 women who wear the niqab in Canada, and 44% said that they do so as a religious obligation. So they feel that's a religious obligation. 44% of the women who were surveyed felt that it's a religious obligation to cover their face, and that's why they do it. Now, people will say, well, you're in Canada now and you're equal and you don't need to do this and so on and so forth. The problem is that we can't force our understanding of equality on others, okay, or our understanding of what it means to adopt certain values or to be equal. You can't force people to adopt that. And they actually feel that this is something that they want to do. And it's not just an immigration issue. It's not just women who are coming from outside of Canada and want to bring these practices, but there's actually women who were born and raised in Canada, perhaps not even Muslim, who converted to Islam, who accepted Islam, and then some of them want to practice their faith in this way as well. So it really comes down to an issue of freedom of expression and a freedom of belief. And there's also a bit of a debate over, okay, is this an Islamic practice or is this a cultural practice? Right? Is this an Islamic practice? Is this a cultural practice? And there's a group of Muslims even who will say that, oh, it's cultural, it has nothing to do with Islam, so you shouldn't be doing it, people don't like it, it just unnecessarily creates problems. But the fact of the matter is, and this is interesting, I think important for us to all know, that what the faith teaches actually does not matter when it comes to a civil rights or human rights perspective in Canada. Okay, so what the actual teachings of the faith are does not matter. Okay, it actually does not matter. What matters is what are the sincerely held beliefs. That's what really matters. Okay, and the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in this case called Syndica North Crest versus Amslam, that regardless of the position taken by religious officials and in religious texts, I think I'm missing a part there when I converted this into a PDF, but basically it's saying that regardless of the position taken by religious officials, so what I say as an Imam, or what any other religious scholar says about the niqab or any other religious practice in any other faith does not matter. Okay, the court is not going to say, oh, this is what you think, okay, what is your opinion, is it mandatory in the faith or is it not? They're not going to get into that. They're not going to decide what is right or what is wrong within a faith. What they base their decision on is what the person sincerely believes to be a part of their faith and that they sincerely want to do, believing that it's a part of their faith. That's what the decision is based on. Okay, and the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that it should, that the sincerely, as long as the practice has a nexus with religion, it should trigger the protection of the Canadian Charter. Because if a person sincerely believes that their faith needs to be covered, or any other practice for that matter, it doesn't matter if any other religious text or any religious leader agrees or not, it doesn't matter. It's what they sincerely believe, and their choice is to be respected within reasonable limits, of course. You can't put undue hardship on other people. Now, in terms of, as I wrap up, what do Muslims actually want? Okay, because, and it's true, sometimes you may not, it may be difficult to believe, but there are, chain emails that go around in various communities about Muslims, about Islam, and about what we want to do and what our hidden agenda is, okay? And it's like, to take over the country and to implement, Sharia and to do this and do that. And I'm like, dude, I never got the memo, okay? Like, I don't know what you're talking about, okay? Because this is something which is not taught, which I definitely do not teach. I never learned from anyone, okay? And there's no such thing. So what do Muslims actually want to do? They want to live peacefully. Generally, so again, I'm speaking generally, I can't speak for every single Muslim, but generally what I hear from the community is people want to live peacefully, they want to have a decent income, they want to have education for themselves and their 4 children, they want health care, just like every other Canadian, probably, and they just want to practice their faith, right, as much as they can. That's what they want to do, and they want to be left alone. They don't want to be dealing with all these different issues. This myth of the Muslim tide that Muslims are coming in and they're trying to take over, it's just not true. It's just not true. The fact of the matter is that if you look at the statistics that are showing you that yes, the numbers of Muslims have been increasing, but up until very recently, Muslims were living peacefully. There was no issue. ISIS did not exist. There was barely any Canadians getting, there's no one who was really getting radicalized. right? And mind you, there's people in other groups as well who go overseas and fight for others as well. Okay, so it's not like it's something tremendously unique that was happening, that started happening in the Muslim community. But even until very recently, there was no issue. You had so many Muslims who've been living for so many years, and people are not trying to kill anyone else, they're not trying to harm the country. So this tells us that these problems and these issues are not inherent to the faith. This is an important point. Okay, Muslims have been here for, as we've seen, for a long time. Okay, so these issues that we're seeing, they're coming up now. So it means that they're not inherent. These problems are not inherent to the faith, but rather they are a reaction to current circumstances. Okay, Muslims have been contributing as in various fields as academics, doctors, and scientists, and business people, engineers, law, in various fields, in law and trades as well. And I mean, even in here at Queens, if you look at some of the departments, there are a number of Muslims who are contributing, and many are still, guided by their faith in making positive contributions. So they're guided by their faith teachings when it comes to their work, when it comes to how to deal with people and the type of things that they want to achieve, guided by the values of justice, mercy, compassion, modesty is an important value as well, and with the desire of betterment for humanity, right? Bettering humanity, bettering the world around us and the society that we live in. Now, even though Muslims have been here for some time, as communities, we're still relatively young. Okay, we're still talking about building mosques. We're still talking about building schools. We're still talking about building community centers, because a lot of the rise and the income levels and everything has actually gone up not too long ago. So we're still lacking in social services. We're still lacking in a lot of the human resources, and are still relatively young as compared to a lot of the other communities. The teachings of social justice and of supporting and being kind to your neighbor and looking out for your community, those are now starting to come up, and you see efforts to support those. So a campaign to support food banks, and I know the community here in Kingston has been doing that, and had the Give 30 campaign during Ramadan here in Kingston as well. We in Ottawa gave a gift of $40,000 to the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario. It's fundraising in Toronto as well for the local hospital. The Islamic community here also contributed to KGH. So you see that happening, and this is all on top of zakat, which is the annual prescribed charity, normally 2.5% of one's excess income that must be given to the needy. And there's different forms of charity, and all different forms of charity in Islam are encouraged. For example, there's a tradition of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that if a young person honors an older person on account of their age, God appoints someone to show reverence to him or her in his old age or their old age. Right? So I actually think there's an opportunity, as we're living in an aging society, to actually serve the community, serve the various segments of the broader community. There's other things that have been mentioned as well, with special emphasis, or that have been specifically mentioned. So feeding the hungry, quenching the thirst of those who are thirsty, planting trees and cultivating land. So even from an environmental perspective, nature, that's something that's encouraged as well. So it's said that even if an animal eats fruits or vegetables or benefits from a tree that you have planted, even that is a form of charity, helping the oppressed and helping the needy. There's programs that, and this is the other thing, that a lot of things the Muslim community is doing based on teachings of Islam, but we're also told not to show off. We're also told to be modest, not to go around bragging about what we've done. So a lot of times it actually doesn't make it out. Not that it has to, but it's just that it's actually not there to counter all the negativity that exists. I know in Ottawa as well, there's a campaign for the homeless. Every week they'll go out and hand out like 300 sandwiches, happening in Toronto as well on the streets. So I mean, there's a lot of good work that Muslims are actually contributing to, along with everyone else here as well. I think there's a great opportunity for Islam and for Muslims to thrive here in Canada. I think the key is to stay calm, understand each other, listen with open eyes and ears and an open mind, support each other in the commonalities that we have, because you know what, there's actually a lot in common that we have as human beings with each other, as opposed to the differences that we have, and that will help us overcome these misunderstandings, and will hopefully, inshallah, God willing, help us build a better world together. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions or comments.
So the floor is open for questions. So everyone's welcome to ask a question. So I'll start. Is there anybody that wants to ask Imam a question regarding the topic?
It doesn't have to be related either.
Or anything.
I'm just, I don't have a fully formed thought here, but I'm just wondering the number of Canadians who don't want to learn about the reality of outside their own, outside their own little world. So it'd be interesting to know the stat of people who would like to know more about the Muslim community or, world events.
Yeah.
And the number who just say, I don't like those,
Yeah.
I don't know, if there was a poll done, which I never heard of,
Yeah.
the number of people you could reach and the number of people who there was no way. I mean, I would guess the number of people who are conservative supporters, Harper supporters, which is hardcore Canadians, I've heard 27%. So that percent you couldn't reach.
Well, actually, there have been Muslim supporters as well of conservatives, surprisingly. So, I mean, that might come as a surprise. But I think, it goes back to, on that point, it goes back again to the diversity I was talking about. And even politically, we see the diversity within the Muslim community as well. But your point is well taken. And I think, and I've thought about it a bit, I think what we're really dealing with is a spectrum. And on one end, you'll have people, as you correctly pointed out, who just don't want to learn, who have certain views, certain misconceptions, or whatever it is that they want to believe in, and they're not willing to listen to anyone, and that's it. So I don't think we can do too much to reach out to that group, unfortunately. However, I think what the challenge right now is that as we look at the spectrum, I think there is in the middle quite a few people, I don't know about the statistics, but my perception is that there's a sizable, perhaps even a majority in the middle, who is willing to be fair, who is willing to give Muslims and others a chance, who is willing to talk and to understand and perhaps agree to disagree, but who is at the very least fair-minded, and they're against discrimination and they want to be fair and give people the rights. Unfortunately, I think what happens is that when such events or unfortunately negative events occur with all the negative coverage, when they are actually looking for some reassurances from the Muslims that they want to support. And a lot of times I think our voices are lacking because either we don't want to speak up or because we feel like, well, I haven't done anything wrong, so why should I go out and have to defend myself? Which in principle is actually true. But in reality, I think it actually doesn't really help because then the group in the middle that is actually looking for reassurance and looking to hear the Muslim voice of rationality is actually not hearing it, or that voice is getting drowned out by all the haters on this side. And therefore, this group in the middle slowly starts seeping away or starts bleeding into that group that doesn't want to hear anything. So that's why it's really important for, number one, for Muslims to be very open about these issues and to just confront them head on. I don't think there's anything wrong in doing that. I think this is actually very positive to, if there's misunderstandings or if there's things that stereotypes or that are being perpetuated, I think it's really important to just challenge them head on. But I think there's also a role for others then who are on the other side of the spectrum, so who are supportive openly or who are willing to be fair even, to actually step up and just seek out those voices and come together and just support each other. And I think if we actually do that, it really means a lot. And sometimes, it can be even the smallest of things. I'll give you an example. I happened to be, at the site of the Ottawa shooting at the War Memorial the day after the shooting. I was called for some interviews as well. Anyway, so I took some flowers and put them there. And as I was doing that, there was a woman who it was like 8 or 9 a.m., so I assumed she was probably going to work or something. And she saw me do that, and she just ran over and she said, "Sir, I just want you to know that this has nothing to do with your faith, and thank you and stay strong." And it was one person, but it really meant a lot because I went in downtown that morning thinking that, well, actually just trying to imagine what everyone else is actually going to be thinking about me because I was dressed the way I usually am. I said I'm not going to change because some wacko did something, stupid. So, I'm still going to be who I am. And but I was anticipating, I was assuming that people would actually be very negative. There would be a lot of hate. There would be a lot of animosity. And just by that one person taking that step, it actually showed me that what, not everyone is actually like that. And if there's one person who could still be positive amidst all of this chaos and confusion, then perhaps there's a lot more people like that. So that's why I think even the smallest acts of just reaching out and being positive really do mean a lot. And I think it's really important for all of us, whether Muslim or not, regardless of your faith or your background, is really to just come together during these times and just just be understanding towards people, give them support, give support to each other. And I think when we do that, then I think we really start building those bonds that we need to build a supportive and positive society.
Perfect. Is there anybody else with a couple of questions? Yes.
At the very start, you just mentioned that news or media play an important role.
Yes.
And it's true for everybody. Say when they focus on something, say either Muslim or other, or any religious groups, they make a perception.
Yes.
And so media is a factor, important factor here. Now, since you are in this involved,
Yes.
how close Muslims are now to have their own media, so that they can also focus, they can also tell the Canadians of the world. I focus Canadians,
Yeah.
they tell their story, how close we are now in that respect.
I think there definitely is. It's a great question, by the way. I think there is a need for Muslim media to get the Muslim voice out, but at the same time, I think we need to remember, to realize that to really be effective in getting our narrative and our perspective out, we have to engage with the mainstream media. Okay, so for example, in Ottawa, we have a newspaper called Muslim Link. And it was running for quite some time, but now they've actually switched to an online version because it's not easy running media. It's whether it's a publication or a broadcast channel. You can have YouTube channels. You can have all of these outlets, which is great because slowly through social media, for example, you can start getting stories out. But it's still not going to be at the scale of mainstream media, right? Because when you talk about mainstream media, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of viewers. Right? You're talking about millions of viewers, and you're not going to reach that scale with your own media outlets. So yes, we should definitely be working towards developing those, but at the same time, I think we really need to be engaging with the mainstream media. So we have this problem in a lot of our communities where we shy away from the media. Okay, so we have this perception that the media is always going to be trying to trap us, or always be trying to get us to say something silly or make us look bad, and because of that, we always shy away. Sometimes it's actually good that we don't always step forward because if you have the wrong person or even the right person who just makes a mistake, it could have really severe consequences. But at the same time, I think we really need to be focused on training people, giving them the skills within the community who can actually go and engage with the mainstream media, right? And it's not just about a one-off interview; it's actually about building a relationship, right? So over time, you get to know people, and then they get to know you as a human being, and not just another Muslim. And then you talk and you discuss things, and even if it's a negative, no matter how negative the story might be, there's always an opportunity to go there and then actually present your narrative and turn it around into something positive. So I think the work definitely needs to continue in terms of building up our own media outlets, but at the same time, the engagement with the mainstream media is crucial as well.
All right. Just to touch up on that, I just want to know, now Sikander, so obviously some of us have seen you on CBC and some of the news outlets. So your personal experience, just my question.
Yeah.
Your personal experience, how did you How did you find that experience? Like, you know, like obviously some people say that the U.S. media streams are not necessarily the best, right? And they kind of twist the words here and there. But from your personal experience, work like, you know, giving an interview for CBC or the other outlets, what did you see? If you could share your experience, that's something that I personally would be interested in.
I think, I mean, it's always very nerve-wracking, especially when you go on TV, and especially if you're live, because there's no second chance, right? And especially, you know, if you're nationally, you can't rewind. You can't be like, oh, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Cut. Can you do that again? You know, you can't because you're live. So it definitely is very challenging, and always, you know, you make dua, you pray before you actually go on, because you want to do the right thing. It's not about, you know, yourself. It's about, you know, trying to say the right thing for the right reasons. For the most part, I've actually, my experience with the media, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because, you know, I have a background in journalism, but my experience has actually been quite positive. I find that, you know, sometimes, you know, it doesn't necessarily, just because the media is being negative, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is all like on one team and they've just sat together and like, you know, had a vow, like a secret, you know, vow in the boardroom somewhere that, okay, we're going to go after these Muslims. Some of them might have done that, but one of those outlets has shut down now, thankfully. But for the most part, I think the mainstream media doesn't really do that. I think they have improved quite a bit over time. And they're really, I think, trying to, you know, give another perspective, try to give, and this is the thing, right? And I'll be honest, right? Sometimes with our community, it's very challenging dealing with it. Okay, so I'll give you an example. So we have, you know, a lot of times you'll say the media only comes to us for a bad news story and all that. Okay, so finally they decide to do something really light. Okay, so on CBC Radio in Ottawa, they were doing just a series on how do you deal with your winter shoes. Okay, like, you know, the mess that comes in and how do you deal with that in different places. So they had a piece about a new masjid that opened up, a new mosque that opened up. And they said, okay, well, how do they deal with the shoes and, you know, so many people coming in and all the mess and so on, okay? So that played for like 6 minutes, okay, like the morning show. And then there was people, Muslims, who were complaining. It's like, why is this Muslim masjid talking about shoes and all that? Who cares about shoes? Talk about more important things. And it's like a no-win situation, right? On the one hand, you're like, oh, they're always talking about something bad, and then they actually try to do something good, and then you're going to, you know, go after them for that. So I think, you know, it really comes down to building relationships and getting to know the media, understanding that it's not always negative. Sometimes they don't have time to sit down and think about how we feel and all of that, right? You're just like, it's a really fast news cycle. You go on one story, boom, you're done with the interview, you go on to something else. You don't have time for background and all of that. Sometimes you do. I had a reporter call me yesterday from CBC, you know, just talking about radicalization, talking about if I can find some parents who are concerned, who will be interested in talking and so on. So some of them do that, but a lot of times they're just not putting all that thought into it. What's important, I think, is to be really conscious about what the question is. Okay, actually two things. So to go in, number one, with what you want to say, okay? So forget about what the question's gonna be first. Just what are your talking points? What do you want to hammer in, okay? Because a good interviewee will actually just go in, take any question, and just turn around in the answer to whatever they want to talk about, okay? So that's the first thing. The second thing also is to pay attention to the question and see what the premise of the question is, okay? I had a reporter who came up to me after the J-Word event, actually before the event, and nice guy, I actually know him. And I know he probably didn't mean to do this, but, you know, he's like, you know, what do you say about the fact that Ottawa has become a hotbed of radicalization? I'm like, hold on a second. What hotbed of radicalization? You have like 3 guys who got arrested. You call that a hotbed of radicalization? And he's like, oh, sorry. Okay. So I think, you know, you really need to be alert as to what the question is, and just challenge that straight up. And just, if you don't agree, if you think there's something wrong with the question, just say it, right? And then, you know, go ahead and say whatever you want. Again, you can't always foresee every single question that's going to come. So sometimes it's possible you're going to, you know, end up in a difficult situation, and you want to say what's right, meaning that people are going to understand, but then you also don't want to be hypocritical. You actually want to say what you believe in, right? So that can sometimes be challenging in trying to put it in a nice way. And it's tough. It's not easy, you know. So if you see someone on TV who actually makes a mistake or says something silly or something that you don't agree with or you think is a little bit too soft, cut them some slack, because, you know, it's not an easy situation to be in. And to myself, I think, you know, it's somewhat like playing with fire. You know, you could get burned one day, but, you know, when you get burned. But until then, you know, you try your best. So that's basically the way I see it.
Okay, so you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, any other questions? The floor is open still.
My train's at 9:23,
yeah,
so
you still got time.
I have some time. But that's okay, I know a lot of people are tired, so that's fine. So we can talk privately as well.
We good? Okay.
Perfect. Jazakallah khair to Imam Sikander. I want to know that. Okay, so inshallah, so that is the end of the event. We have some refreshments outside. So just a reminder, on Thursday, Imam Shariar will be giving a speech on the topic of who was Muhammad, peace be upon him, in Biosciences 1103. Invite your friends, let people know. We are doing our best to advertise. Imam Sikander, you gotta come up here for one more second. My mistake, come up here for one more second. Sorry? The venue will be in Biosciences room 1103. Yeah, so that's in the medical, by the medical building, inshallah. And then on Friday, brothers and sisters, we have Jummah here on campus. We are inviting non-Muslims to come and see what it's like to see how Muslims pray. So we will have chairs set up. So please let your friends know and if they're interested in that. So without further ado, I just want to ask Sister Hind to come down. We have a gift for you. So Jazakallah khair. Thank you for coming. And we wish you the best of luck. You're doing extremely well. And yeah, any last words, and then we can just wrap up.
Thank you. I miss all of you as well. Thank you so much for your warmth and your kindness. Just one thing I wanted to add is, a lot of this may appear to be, for a Muslim audience, maybe stuff that you already know, or is something that's redundant, and we don't really need to learn about it. But I think what is important is that we take tips on how we can deal with it if we actually come up with these issues, because these issues may not come up with your coworkers or with your fellow students or whoever, but a lot of people are thinking about them. Okay, and the situation that we find ourselves in today, I would say, is almost unprecedented. So there's rarely been a time in the past when the tension or the fear has been this high. Maybe it was after 9/11, but right now there's a lot more going on that is making a lot of people fearful and afraid. And I think it's really, really important for us, for Muslims, to reach out and to try to understand what people are going through. Because if someone is being afraid, you don't want to lash out at them, right? But you actually want to understand why they're feeling afraid, and you want to try to reassure them and calm them down. And the best way to do that really is through your actions. And also, if you find an opportunity to talk about some of these things, it is fine to actually touch upon the topic and just share those feelings. And I think that really goes a long way in reassuring people, and then they can go ahead and share that with others as well, inshallah.
All right, assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. Inshallah, we'll see you Thursday. Assalam.